Hello and welcome to Gaming the Podcast. In this episode, we're looking at the Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver and discussing what we'd like to see from and how we would handle a full remake of the game if it were to happen today. My name is John Robertson and I'll be joined shortly by Stace Harmon, and together we are Indie by Design, video game design consultants and authors of books that celebrate game design, culture and history. Do visit indiebydesign.net, that's indiebydesign.net for more on the books that we create. But for now, come and join us on a journey of rediscovering Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Here's a clip.
I know you, Revear. You are worthy.
What madness is this? What pitiful form is this that I have come to inhabit? Death would be a release next to this travesty.
Okay, so Soul Reaver, Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Why are we here in the first place? Why is this the game that we want remade? Of all the games that could be remade, we've chosen this one.
Yeah. Well, it has a very rich history, right? Like, so we both played it many, many years ago. 23 years ago, Soul Reaver came out, which, you know, does all sorts of things to my my mental well-being and how old I feel. So we played it a long, long time ago. It was a brilliant game at the time, and I think in the right hands and done the right way, it could be more than just kind of a direct remake. I think there could be a lot of like modernization with it. And we've talked about this recently, but there is a real lack of really interesting, really exciting vampire games or games with vampires in them. So there's a real, like, I think it's an undermined niche. And
undermined or undermined?
Undermined, yeah. Well, you know, it's one that hasn't been mined much. So there's a lot of scope here. There's a lot of potential, and it's also a series that has a very dedicated fan base. And I think that's the thing. You know, as much as I had my own memories to fall back on of the original game, doing a lot of research for this episode, it's very clear that there is a very passionate fan base out there that keeps a lot of the kind of the wikis and the Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, Blood Omen properties kind of alive or undead, with the amount of knowledge they have and the amount of passion they have for it. So I think there's an audience, there's a desire to see something that's a little bit different, and I think it's just, yeah, like we've seen that there can be some very exciting, very, very well done remakes. So I think this would be a good property to revive, or, you know, even a full sequel, but that's a separate episode. But yeah, a remake of Soul Reaver should be on the cards somewhere. I hope that it is. But
yeah, I think when I think what struck me about it when I first played it, and I can't remember if I played it when it first came out or if it was like a bit later, but anyway, it was PS1 era when PS1 was still the dominant console when I played it, at least. And I think, like, what struck me about it then was that it was maybe the first, or certainly one of the first, 3D action adventure games that was really intelligent and made you think about both the narrative and the lore and the characters and all of that, and the depth there, but also the gameplay and like the spectral material realm switching and the different like tools and items that you get over time, that or abilities that you get over time that kind of open up the way that you thought about the game differently and what you could achieve in the game as the game went on. I just remember that there's just being a lot of real food for thought about, you know, how games work and how games make the players feel and how games make you feel more or less powerful over time as you play them and as you do new and different things in the game, and how the spectral and the material realm, the switching between them, you know, it was blatant, but it was a really effective way of getting you to think about the same spaces in different ways, and having two kind of what would normally be separate places kind of combine into one thought process, you know, and you had to pick and engage with both sides, both realms at the same time in order to understand how to get through the level. You know, when you're in one realm, you also had to think about the other realm at the same time. So both kind of existed in your minds as one
Yeah.
big picture.
In a way that I think doesn't happen. Like it's I reckon it's probably easier, or at least it's certainly more common. Who knows if it's easier? More common to just have a bigger map that has different areas, probably different biomes. This had that to an extent for sure, but when you're in one, you're not necessarily thinking directly about the lessons of another. So you're not thinking about, well, in that fire biome, I had to jump on these blocks that then burst into flames. And when you're in the ice biome, is there a parallel, or is it just a different thing? Oh, they're slippery instead of, bursting into flames.
Sounds like you're totally trashing Mario right here. A lot of people like Mario.
Oh yeah, there is a game like that already, yeah. But here it's very much like, yeah, you are thinking about that same space in this sort of duality of purpose of like, well, what, and you're viewing things in exactly as you've said, in one realm as, okay, but if I switch to spectral, what's that going to look like? Is there going to be a block there? And you start to learn that about the design. You start to learn the notion of this looks like the kind of place that would have something in it if I switch over. And that, I think it meant that it doesn't have to be a massive map. Like it was quite a relatively small map, but that had those two different planes that made it more interesting than just let's add it added vertical depth rather than just like let's add breadth to it by having more and more areas. So, and I think that particular element of it could be done really well. Like, so the map for a start, let's start there, I guess, in terms of what would a remake look like or what would we want from a remake. I think that in a day and age where there's a lot of obsession about, oh, how big's the map? Oh, it's an open world, or, it's a semi-open world. How big is the map? Well, I don't think we should worry too much about that. I think I would rather see it be a condensed map that is far more detailed. Something like, I don't know, pluck, one of the many areas of Elden Ring, for example, and like just have stuff to do all over the place, but have this duality of the two, the spectral and the material realm, really designed into the game, into the identity of the game, not just, to solve this puzzle. Oh, I can do this, and there's now blocks there that I can jump up and get to that area that I couldn't get to before. But really, the two places exist and have a purpose outside of just block puzzles or environmental puzzles. And so that, I'd like to see that kind of, because it's a unique part of the game, and this is sort of a common theme of the notes that I've got about this, is really leaning on the uniqueness of Soul Reaver and the Legacy of Kain series as a whole, rather than it just being sort of a reskin of a different open world game. Like, I want it to really lean into, the horror stuff as well, which we'll go into later. But yeah, this is where it starts, kind of that, the map is where it starts. And I'd, a bit further than that, I'd like to see it be like Raziel's, or Raziel, depending on how you pronounce his name, Raziel's memories of that map. So in terms of how the mechanics of how you might unlock the map, because it's a direct continuation of Blood Omen, and I think it's like 1,500 years or something to that effect, after the events of Blood Omen. And then possibly Raziel then, I think, is like in that falling for 500 years. But anyway, it's a good long while. So I'd like to see the map be like Raziel's memories of what his environment looked like at the time he was cast out. And then, so the map's there. Like, there isn't this thing of going to towers and unlocking the map. The map is there, but it's an imperfect memory. And so you travel around, and so you think, oh, there was a palace there, or there's a castle there. And you get there and it's in ruins. And there's like more of a personal tying it to Raziel rather than just, you are a visitor to this world. It's like, this is kind of his world, but it's not as he remembers it, because
I like the idea that you got a map, but it's essentially out of date, and you're kind of you're updating it as you go. It's interesting you said about Elden Ring, because when I was thinking about like what kind of form the game would take in terms of its space, its environment, I was thinking that an open world, but with like level areas, like in Elden Ring, you got a big open world, but then there's a big castle and there's a big underground mine or whatever. That would work really well, and being able to flip between that and the spectral realm at a press of a button, which you could do on like modern PCs and PS5, that would be totally fine. I'm sure Xbox managed. It might be a bit slower loading time, but unlike Ratchet and Clank on PS5, they prove they can just load instantly. So like, I don't think that would be that. Technically, that wouldn't be a problem, and you'd have a great frame rate and everything. You wouldn't need to run both levels at the same time. You just load it in instantly. And then I was thinking like the way that you would progress and unlock stuff, like how the way you would go through the map and explore new areas, unlock new areas. And I was thinking that it could be essentially like an open world but with levels, and you can flip between the realms as much as you want. But it would kind of have like a Metroidvania kind of approach to getting through new places. So it could be like, you're in this area, but you don't have the tools to, I don't know, burn the vines or whatever
Sure.
Metroidvania sort of cliche. Like, it wouldn't be that, but you'd have to find a tool or gain an ability to progress past. And then when you're saying about it would be his memory of the map that you're playing to until you update those areas. It could be that the abilities and the tools that he's finding are also things that he knows of. So like when you came up against like the vines that you need to burn down, he could say like, oh, if only I had that thing that I used to have 2000 years ago. And then that would be like the kind of progression system. So it would be open world, but it would also be not linear, but like you would be, the pacing of unlocking stuff would be somewhat predetermined because you'd gatekeep, as a designer, which areas are needed, which tools are required in order to progress past a certain area. So you'd still know that the player has to do A, then B, then C in order to get through. So it wouldn't be totally open worlds, although I think some exploration elements would be beneficial. And I was thinking, like, why wouldn't it just be fully open world, do whatever you want, like Elden Ring, go elsewhere and do whatever. And I think for a game like remaking Legacy of Kain with such a focused, well, I was going to say focused narrative, it's not necessarily that focused, it kind of goes in a lot of places, but like a precise narrative, like a precise plot, I think you probably need to, you can't have if you wanted to keep that story, you can't have a player just coming up against the last boss immediately.
I think like and I think in terms of staying true to the original or be recognizable as the original, I think maybe a fully open world is kind of maybe a sequel or something. It's like a new entry. A semi-open world
always go bigger in the sequel. A huge open 1 million square miles.
Yeah, but like something that opens a cluster of regions. Because another thing that I'd like to see is, and that I remember from both Soul Reaver and Blood Omen particularly, was it had a very strong cast of characters. It had a cast of characters that felt like they had their own motivations and they weren't just there to thwart the player. They were trying to do their own thing. Like they had their own, schemes. They had their own motivations and manipulations. And having a lot more of that here. So I imagine like following the kind of semi-open world idea, having that you open perhaps a cluster of regions together. Because what I'd like to see is the notion that you don't just go into a region, rinse it, get the power, and then you're done. Like, and this is kind of what you're alluding to, or talking about.
Like
this
Zelda.
Of crisscrossing.
Zelda's like that.
Yeah, it is. And so there's a crisscrossing potentially here with, I need to come back here later once I've got X, or I either I have to for progress, or I should do because there's some cool stuff here that I could get into if I've got this particular power or tool or whatever it is. But opening a few kind of these regions in one go, meaning that you can tackle those in any order, but maybe they're limited to sort of perhaps three or four, and following the same narrative with like you're going to visit basically his brothers, and then you're seeing through Razil's eyes as well what his brothers have become. They've been twisted into these monstrosities. There's a lot of kind of relationship stuff there that can be, because there's an element of like they're sympathetic to what's happened to Razil because they were just doing what Kain told them. He's been disfigured. He has this like, why do I exist air about him. And they have a similar thing, but they've lived through the last 500 years that he was just floating through the ether. So there's I'd like to see like the manipulation element play out here with, you don't have to just go and kill every boss. It's like, there's maybe like a Shadow of Mordor kind of thing, where there's like not necessarily a nemesis system, but you can go and get people on your side. It's not just about, it's like, the enemy of my enemy kind of thing. Like you can go and talk to these people and do things for them, and then they are more likely to come onto your side. And it might be that ultimately you have to kill them all, you have to betray them all perhaps, or maybe there's ways of getting the stuff that you need without doing that. But this thing of like using those familial bonds of a shared history, using that in the moment of the gameplay, rather than just, oh, isn't it sad that we used to be brothers and now we're enemies, and okay, now you're dead, give me your special power. Like there's more of it takes longer to build, and it would take some juggling because you'd have to manage the relationships, and it's like, well, if this person's alive and this person's alive, how does that affect X? But there's like, it can be done on a relatively simple basis of just, you can team up with this person against this person, and maybe nothing else, in this remake. Again, maybe there's a sequel where it's a bit more of a spider web of kind of relationships. But yeah, something that plays on that strong cast of characters and the narrative, which I remember feeling at the time it was one of the first games I remember feeling was very, like, it felt mature. It felt like it was taking itself seriously and wasn't too bothered about whether you got it or not. It was kind of one of those, like, well, I am what I am. It wasn't that bothered about like trying to make you understand everything. It could have a relatively complex narrative, and again, particularly Blood Omen.
So are you saying that some of the bosses could be defeated through diplomacy, not combat?
Effectively, yes. And but or even at the least, it could be that there is the opportunity to team up until such time that you then have to deal with it a different way. Maybe it's a bit more linear than that at some point you're going to have to kill all these people, and perhaps they know that. Like, they know that that's in the offing, that the only way for you to ascend, or the only way for you to get ultimately what you want, is to kill them, and they know that as characters, and they're, Raziel and his brothers are having conversations around that. But something that really digs into the fact that it was a strong cast of characters, and I had like sympathy, because this is an anti-hero thing, but and Raziel is more of an anti-hero, I think, than, say, Kain was. Kain in Blood Omen he was basically just a villain. Like, he was so far, beyond being an anti-hero that he was really just a villain out for revenge. But, so there's a relationship thing here that could be managed. So, yes, you could talk to them, get them on side. They'll lend you their forces or their armies, or here's this special trinket that you can use to go and defeat my brother, who I've got, beef with because stuff's happened in the 500 years that you've been away. But ultimately, you're going to have to kill them, and that creates this tension that they know, and they're planning for that in the background. So it's just like I think this just leans on the uniqueness, or what felt like a uniqueness at the time, of fleshed out characters that actually have more going on than just, oh yes, I was just sat here in this arena waiting for you to turn up so I could fight you, or oppose you at least.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the sort of pillars of the remake that I've got here is that the focus, it'll be good if around combat, which could just be expanded to be around engagements with other characters, is that there should be a focus on being smarter than your opponents, rather than just like constantly, just bashing them with a combo over and over again or something. Not only on both like the regular enemies and the bosses as well, but particularly the bosses. Rather than just smashing with the combo, it would be like you need to figure out something in the environment that you need to utilize your advantage, or you need to figure out where the weak spot is. But in order to get to the weak spot, you're not just smashing away at armor. You've got to like induce a certain behavior from them, or something. So on that side, I think that there should still be like what you're saying, like the boss fight shouldn't be taken away from the game as like killer moments, like amazing set piece. And
something that uses the material and the spectral plane in that way, like the ability to pull them into one or the other and switch between the two. I can imagine like an extreme, like a Devil May Cry kind of, combo chain where you're switching between the spectral and the material realm and using the environment, and like, I mean, that would be
that'd
awesome.
be cool. Yeah,
but and something that, I think along those lines was something that where you don't killing every enemy isn't necessarily the best course of action. Perhaps, like Resident Evil, perhaps you've got limited resources, and sometimes just running past enemies is the better call because, I don't know, you need to use... There's 5 enemies to kill, but only 3 stakes at hand, or, something, whatever it is.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that could be... that could be encouraged by having, like, a very strict, like, health mechanic. Where like your health is difficult to get back, or enemies do a lot of damage to you, almost like playing like early levels of Bloodborne or something. Where
you choose your engagements, kind of thing.
You do kind of end up killing everyone. In that actually, as you go through, because you want the souls.
Like, I'm not going to kill that yet. I'm going to. So that's a big dude. if I can creep past, I might do. I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
There is that decision making. It's not just full on.
Although that actually gets an interesting point here. So in terms of leveling up or whatever, gaining abilities, I was thinking that. And this would be where the pacing and the order of doing things would need to be kind of more strict than Elden Ring, like we said. In that, like, you'd need like a certain item, a certain ability, a certain weapon in order to kill a boss. So you'd need to get that before you killed the boss. And I was thinking that like we could just do away with any leveling up system, any like XP, and all of your gains, again like Zelda, I suppose, could just come through. Although also like the original, can come through gaining items that give you new abilities, and then that's how you engage more with the world. That's how you do more stuff. That's how you have more choice about how you go to defeat enemies, or how you avoid enemies, or which areas you go in, or what you can and can't do in each plane. And then I was taking that one step further, and the Soul Reaver, the actual Soul Reaver, the weapon, that could almost become like the main secondary character, because maybe what you don't get new items, you just get new abilities for that sword.
Yeah.
So then that sword becomes like, there has a chance to become like a legendary weapon in video game history, because you're just adding to that thing all the time. And then that sets up the possibility that because everything is located in one, it's not a single source of power, because Revear himself has power, but his single weapon, like the weapon of legends, basically, that could, like, it's such an easy win. Like, okay, well, now we're going to take that away from you for the next 3 hours, and now you've got to like just, be stealthy or just rely on your regular movement to get through. And like, you could maybe like tussle with some enemies, but maybe not. Maybe you wouldn't have the ability to kill them. Like, you'd have the ability to like parry them or avoid them, or get past them in some way. But you couldn't just.
Like the Elden Ring, you down them, but then they, like the skeletons, they just get back up. So it buys you some time to get away or to maneuver, but ultimately, you're not able to put them to rest because you've lost your your main
and you can have a boss fight where you don't have the weapon or something like that. Like one of the, what is it, 5 brothers? Is it?
I think so.
Like one of those major boss fights, one of those key moment, key plot beat fights could be like without the sword or whatever. I know that's going into quite a granular detail, but it's just the kind of things that are possible when you limit the player's tools to all being around a single thing. Then it's easy to use that single tool as a plot device, as well as just like a mechanical means of interacting with the game.
Yeah, and I also really like that idea of like maybe having a boss fight twice, because it builds the character. It's a bit like in D&D when you show the players your super baddie, and they, you need to be clever about that, because there's a good chance they're just going to wail on that enemy and kill them in a much quicker time than you had anticipated, and then they're gone. So introducing them in this way that you're talking about, with like a boss fight that you can't win, you can only fight it to a standstill, and then them coming back later, and then you do, and it's, hopefully it's a different boss fight, not just the same boss fight, but now you've got a weapon. It adds that kind of progression. It adds that that story progression, that kind of drama of, you know, next time I'll get you kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and like you could just barely escape with your life. And then you come back stronger next time. I mean, it's Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. But,
all the best stories. Yeah. And I'm also a sucker for a weapon that does a lot. So there was a cartoon on when I was a kid, even before Soul Reaver, back in the 80s, called Ulysses. It had a date on it. Ulysses like 2077 or something, 2099, something to that effect. And it was very much the story, like the Greek myth. But it was set in space, which is where the 2099 bit, whatever it was.
Everything in 2099 will be in space.
Yeah, for sure.
The Earth will be destroyed.
He had a laser gun that was also basically a lightsaber, like a sword came out the top of it. And I also thought he had a shield on that, but I looked it up and he had a shield on his other arm. But like, and then there was I think it was a Resistance game? Was that a PS4 launch title? Whatever that Resistance game was, I think it was Resistance. Your gun in that turned into multiple things. It was like an assault rifle, a sniper rifle, and you had this one weapon. You picked up other weapons, but to start with, I think you had this one weapon that was also like a grappling hook. And I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. Like a one tool that then adapts into other things, I think would be great. Rather than having this inventory of 15 weapons, just give me one thing that can do multiple things. And a sword that can also be a whip and a grappling hook and everything else sounds good to me. Yeah, I'm in on that for sure. Yeah. So okay. So we've got like a rough world structure. Got some sort of interactions and the enemies. The puzzling would be on like the dual plane thing. And yeah, I like to see that really densely packed. So it's not just, oh, here's the bit where I obviously need to switch to the spectral plane in order to get up there. It's like there's interest in doing that just all the time. Like they are two separate places effectively that exist in the same space. And you're just, you can switch between them. And there's, perhaps side quests, not literally an NPC stood there waiting to give you a side quest, but there's things to explore and
because there's various things you can
examine.
There's various things you can do with that rather than just you'd have to in keeping with the lore, but like there's various things you could do with that. Like it doesn't need to just be the door's open in this realm and it's not open in that realm. It could be like there's like in this area of the spectral plane there's like a subtly different strength of gravity or there's whatever, like these items act differently in this area than in that area. Like it could be more complex than just the door's open here, it's not open there, or some variation of the door's open here, it's not open there. Like there's a block missing in the castle and then there's not a block missing on this side, just different routes.
Something
basically.
That mirrors, so there would be different biomes invariably. There'd be different biomes in the material world, but then something in the spectral realm that plays off the uniqueness of each biome in that way that you're talking about. So perhaps, there's the biome is the sort of standard fire, ice, all the rest of it. But in the spectral realm, in the ice biome, there's something that makes narrative sense or thematic sense in the way that realm behaves. And so you're still, not only are you having to think about it on those two levels of material and spectral, but you're having to think about how the spectral realm behaves depending on where you are. And that, which could also then tie into like the tools that you get and the abilities that you get and utilizing different things in different ways. I think that kind of notion of you're just given tools and then you can explore, like Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring, that you're given tools and you can explore and find interactions that feel like they weren't intended. Is actually clearly if I can glide, then I'm meant to use that here, but actually I could go over to that other biome and switch to spectral realm and use that in such a way that maybe I can do X, Y, and Z. And just the fact that it's encouraging and inviting you to think about stuff, not just what's on the screen in front of you and you need to get past that locked door. It's more like you're kind of mapping it out in your head as well as on the screen.
Because that opens up the door to so many like optional areas, optional puzzles, optional rewards, optional whatever, optional pieces of narrative and like different characters even, by having that sort of thing only accessible if you've performed some, really difficult or not necessarily even difficult, but like some of them could be difficult to perform, and others could just be they're difficult to find in the first place. Like, so you just got to keep your eyes open. I think on the spectral realm side as well, and I'm just thinking purely visually. The original had that like, and it was good that they went for it because the amount of detail and the amount of polygons and lines that they could have was so small. But they had that like German expressionist cinema look of like Metropolis and Nosferatu and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, all of this stuff where all of the lines are like, well, not all of them, but many of them are like slightly awkward, and and the perspective is a bit messed up, and the contrast is incredibly high between like light and shadow and light and dark. So keeping that theme certainly in the spectral realm, maybe even I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but maybe even have it black and white and just have the whole thing black and white and be really, really high contrast, black and white. And maybe, because the original also had those splashes of color, right? They had like bright green and bright pink and neon blue. So maybe that can still be there with like your weapon or your attacks or whatever. Like the moon in the sky can be, some fancy color. Not fancy color other than white. To really drive home the difference between those two, the spectral and the material realm, and like making the spectral realm like everything's kind of slightly off and slightly weird, gives it that like, I don't belong here, I shouldn't be here. This is not only like a sort of alien place, but a place that's inherently difficult for me and the character and me as the player to like even comprehend in a way that bears any resemblance to like what I know and what.
Well, and that feeds very much. The leaning on like some of the kind of phantasmagorical, like the cosmic horror, because there was like the whole elder god, or I don't remember specifically what it was called, but the Elden god. Perhaps I'm thinking of Elden Ring. There was like an elder god thing in that, which is kind of a Lovecraft type vibe, but leaning very heavily into that. Something that is, again, it's not just Raziel is just like, he's a he's a sexy vampire, or he's this cool dude. Like it really leans into that, really explores it both visually and from a narrative standpoint, because there's like a, this is about the whole vampire thing being kind of not particularly well done, or just not fully explored, I don't think. So in something like, again, going to D&D, something like the vampire module in that, where it explores the Curse of Strahd, it explores who Strahd is, it explores what his motivations are, what the motivations are of somebody that is basically immortal. And here you're very explicitly told that a huge passage of time has passed. And something that explores like what that means. What happens when you have eternity to live? What happens when 1500 years can go by and you still have memories of what happened all that time ago? Something that leans into that from a narrative standpoint. And also the macabre, this notion of like making you feel just slightly uncomfortable, like you don't quite belong, there's something off here. I'd like to see that explored a bit more, because again, it's just not in a remake like this. I think when you've got all of the extra processing power, you've got the ability to put that on the screen in perhaps a way that you couldn't before. It can be done stylistically, but also it can be done just very, very literally. Just put it on the screen in a very like actual render it, actually show it, and make people feel slightly off. Returnal does this with some of its cutscenes. There's just weird like tentacle stuff and weird just things move in a weird way. So something that leans into that, and again, really just plays on the idea of these, like the vampiric nature, the notion of immortality. Like, what does all of these things mean? More than just, this dude's 1500 years old. That's cool. Like it actually is. There's a bit more to it than that.
That could be explored with the interactions through the brothers. But you could also have cutscenes that, and I know that not many games do this sort of thing because they always want to keep it like player centric, like or all about the activity of the player character. But you could zoom out and have
like
Kain.
interludes.
Yeah, you could have cutscenes of Kain, and Kain could be like looking over like what you're doing. So like you've almost got this sense of as you as Reziel in this world. It's like you've always got this person watching, but I mean that's Lord of the Rings. So,
and Kain should be represented by this really big tower.
But you know, like so you got this sense of when you're playing. So that achieves two things. It gives you as the sense that you're always being watched, that you're never safe. That like you know more than Raziel. You know that he's being watched all the time. All of his movements, sort of his achievements, sort of his ability upgrades and whatever are being watched. But it also gives you a chance to investigate the Kain character more as you're going along and make the Kain character feel part of every moment and have some sort of response to the big moments. So that when you invariably come into contact with him later, it's not like it's just like, he's just come back again. Like he left the room for 5 hours and now he's back later. Like you're actually more connected to him. So it's like a dual story going on. So you could see like potentially two perspectives. They wouldn't need to be necessarily different, but like different enough that it invites the player to think about the world in a way that's bigger than just seeing it through Raziel's eyes.
And you know that's really interesting because the one of the notes I've got is about I'd like to see Kain as a legend, as like as an ever present entity, as a like the world exists in the way that it does because Kain made a decision 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and there isn't. I don't buy the idea that there's no way that there isn't anybody that exists in this world that doesn't know that. They know who Kain is. They know like why they live the way they do. And so exploring that in exactly this way that you're talking about, having Kain be explored as not just a character, but as this like God, effectively, this, you know, this ever present entity and people are in fear of him. There's a couple of quick things that tie into that with the idea of like, I'd like to see how vampires live, because this notion of like, they will have had a solution to the fact that they need to feed. This idea that every time they need a meal or they get a bit peckish, they wander down to the local village and snatch away a maiden or whatever is nonsense. Like if you live for that amount of time, you have a solution to this. And it's a little bit like what they did in Blade, the Wesley Snipes films, Blade, where it's like the vampires have got this sorted out. They've set up these factories, and it's just something.
Well, they go clubbing and then they put the blood through the sprinkler system.
For the sake of like one human or something like that. Something that explores that, something that explores Kain as this kind of omnipresent figure, and that also explores the idea of like the old and the new. So there isn't Kain is evil, that's the end of that, and Raziel's the hero or the anti-hero. It reminds me a little bit of like Ghost of Tsushima, where it's this clash of the old ideological way and the newer, well, this is what's going to get results kind of way. And having these kind of interludes.
Pragmatic way.
Yeah, it's like, well, we have to abandon some of that if we want to, this is our situation, so this is what we need to react to. Having some of that explored through Kain's musings and his conversations in these kind of cutscenes and interludes that you're talking about, and then having Raziel doing his thing gives you that duality. It's not just, I'm here to kill Kain because Kain's evil, and then because that also then means that a lot of stuff gets pent up, and then when you do meet Kain, he then has to have a 20-minute monologue telling, but you could intersperse the game with all of this stuff, and then you feel a bit more conflicted. It gives you a bit more to think about beyond just one character's point of view, as exactly as you're talking about. So, and
then the game ends on a cliffhanger. Do you do this or do you do that? Something involving Kain, like do you kill Kain or do you not, or whatever?
Yeah, or is there a third choice? Does the coin land on its edge? I thought about that. I thought about would there need to be like, and I think for a straight remake there wouldn't be, but I was thinking would there need to be like bringing in elements of Soul Reaver 2 in to be able to wrap the story up, or are we really saying that if you're remaking Soul Reaver, then you also kind of need to remake Soul Reaver 2 as well, because they were like two halves of a game, really. They couldn't be done as one thing for logistical reasons. But how do you end it?
I think that would be my preference. I mean, I'm not anything in terms of the remake. I'm not the one with the budget strings, but I mean, it would be good to announce a series of games, like a trilogy, like the trilogy's being remade, almost like Final Fantasy VII remake being split into various games, and that's just one game being split up. But yeah, this could be like a remake of the whole story from Soul
and even
Reaver
if it was just
forwards.
initially we're remaking Blood Omen and Soul Reaver 1 to start with, and if that goes down well, then we'll look to progress. It's like a bit like, I don't know, like going to see Dune recently. It was like, well, part 2 isn't a given unless it does reasonably well, so come out and support it. That would be having those two things announced at the same time, because Blood Omen, I think I actually prefer Blood Omen to Soul Reaver, but in terms of a personal favorite. But having those two announced, and then it's like, well, maybe there'll be a remake of Soul Reaver 2, or even just another, a whole other sequel.
Because I think you'd have to do it the other. I don't know how much on a narrative level in terms of what the games are offering. I don't know how much sense it would make to announce Blood Omen and Legacy of Soul Reaver sequel, because they can stand separately. Those two things, whereas Soul Reaver needs the rest of the story, like from the other games, in order to be complete.
Yeah, I think I got so much out of playing Blood Omen, and then seeing this character that I'd played as. It was like that origin story, but not just in a cutscene or a flashback. I'd played as Kain. I felt that I understood some of his motivations, or at least my interpretation of his motivations. And then to go into Soul Reaver and have him be effectively the antagonist was like, that's really cool. That doesn't happen very often. It's, again, keep bringing up D&D, but like there's the option to do that, or the ability to do that in D&D, where you can play through an origin story first in a separate like mini campaign, or just a one-off kind of one-shot. But yeah, doing that here over many, many hours as Kain, and then having him in Soul Reaver. That's why I think the two are very directly linked and benefit hugely from each other. It's quite a unique thing about them. But logistically, sure. I mean, it doesn't, is that enough? You can just have a 5-minute cutscene at the beginning of Soul Reaver remake showing what's happened previously, but getting to actually feel it, that was one of the things, I think that's one of the enduring things for me, that like, yes, Kane's still around in Soul Reaver, but he's gone from being, he's followed what seemed to me to be his natural path. Like at the end of Blood Omen, you get to pick good ending, bad ending. To me, it made no sense to pick like this good ending where everything's idyllic and Kain sacrifices himself. So no, he's fully bought into this now, and that becomes canon for Soul Reaver. That's the ending that they picked up for Soul Reaver.
Yes, I think we're starting on the Soul Reaver remake. You're again, to use Star Wars, like you're doing essentially what Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope is, and you're ignoring the birth of Darth Vader and just saying, actually, it's Luke Skywalker. That's the important one. We don't need to tell 3 stories worth of how Darth Vader came to be. Like that can be done later after we've got everyone to love Luke Skywalker. I think it's.
Yeah,
I think that
makes absolute sense. And I would take, if it was we can't, there's no way we can finance and remake 2 games. Let's just focus on one. Cool, I'm up for a Soul Reaver remake for sure.
Well, you do a full Soul Reaver remake, but then you do like a little indie team can do Blood Omen, and then you've got your budget sorted out.
Well, it could be just remade almost adventure. As it was, like remade from a top down, very like single screen kind of on, it's not like it's not 3D, it's just that. And then, maybe with a style that was like, what was it? Like Thronebreaker, the Witcher Gwent. Sort of side story thing, Gwent. Something that's a bit more like that as Blood Omen, which then gives you a good feel of who Kain is, what he's doing, why he exists. And then, Soul Reaver is like a full-on, fully fledged, semi-open world, 3D narrative adventure with a good combat system, a decent like focus on abilities rather than skill trees, unlocking new areas. The Soul Reaver itself is like a multi-purpose tool and weapon that you can then take away to provide tension and provide a different gaming experience once you lose that. And that, yeah, deals with all the same kind of the existential stuff, the horror elements, the philosophical stuff as well. Yeah, I mean, this, I'm in. I'll buy it.
Just, yeah, that's, but just to end it, the final thing. If you buy the £150 digital deluxe edition, then you get the Blood Omen remake as part of it.
Put it on Kickstarter. I'm sold.
Yeah, and you get like 5 wallpapers, and then that's done.
Only for mobile, though. I'm not. If it's not for mobile, I'm not interested.
Yeah, well, obviously.
An eternity passed, and my torment receded, bringing me back from the precipice of madness. The descent had destroyed me, and yet I lived.
Thank you very much for listening. Now, next week, we're going to be talking about who we are and who we become when playing as a character in a video game. So discussion will revolve around questions such as, are we ourselves when we're playing? Does our sense of self actually feel diminished when playing a game? To what extent do we think like we're acting as we understand the character to act in this world, or are we acting how we like to think we'd act if we were suddenly transported there? Do we become a different person when playing, some kind of combination of the character as written and our own vision of events? So that's coming next week. Do subscribe to us on Apple, Google, Spotify, literally anywhere podcasts are found, anywhere you'd think about getting a podcast from, we're there. And while there, if you could leave us a 5-star review, then that would be much appreciated and absolutely fantastic. And finally, if you'd like to stay up to date with the books that we create and any special offers that occur and are applied to those books, then do visit indiebydesign.net and follow us on Twitter. We are at indiebydesign. Thanks for listening, and see you again next time.